Hello and welcome to Shaking the B2B Tree, the podcast that brings you real stories, strategies and lessons from trailblazing marketers that think and act differently to achieve success. We'll be revealing practical solutions and valuable insights from the best in business to business, as they discuss their specialisms, share what works, what doesn't, and the lessons they've learned. Whether it's authentic storytelling, creating meaningful content, or generating real thought leadership, our guests have insights that can help you on the way to your next B2B marketing breakthrough. So let's get into today's conversation and see what we can shake loose. In this episode, we'll be discussing B2B thought leadership. And to do this, I'm joined today by Madelaine Oppert, who is VP of Marketing at iResearch, and also by Claire Lamb, who is my co-director at Scout. Madelaine, thanks very much for joining us today on the podcast. If you could just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, and also we'd love to know from you what your favourite podcast is.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm very happy to be here. I'm Madelaine Oppert. I'm the VP of Marketing for iResearch Services. We build global thought leadership, delivering bold and impactful thought leadership campaigns. We're passionate about building the thought leadership community. I've been in the marketing space for over 18 years, focusing on driving strategies that connect brands with their audiences through innovative and meaningful approaches. Talking about my favorite podcast, I'm normally a crime podcast junkie, anything to do with crime and solving real crimes. But since December, I've really gone down the rabbit hole of Mel Robbins' podcast. And she shares practical advice and personal stories on how people can improve their lives. And she's recently launched the Let Them theory, which is a really interesting and sometimes challenging theory to try and adapt. It's about letting people be themselves without trying to change them. So that's been an interesting lesson that I've been trying to pick up. So that's really the podcast and a little bit about me.
I love Mel Robbins. I'm a big fan. So I don't listen to her podcast, but I do follow her on Instagram. Yeah. And I love her. She's nuts and bolts. She's really happy to turn up, no makeup, Yeah. There's nothing kind of false about her at all. So yeah, I'm with you on that one. I will check out the podcast, although I do find her a little challenging. Sometimes I'm like, I don't really know if I want to do that.
Yeah, some of it
that's got to be a good thing.
Well, exactly. And I think the whole theory of let them, it's kind of like it's easy. It sounds a lot easier. It is a lot easier in principle than it is in practice. But really trying to let people be themselves. So if someone irritates you at work or at home, you just have to kind of say, let them. It's their journey. We'll get there in the end.
We'll see if we can apply that when we're on the road.
Yeah, let's see if that helps.
Yeah, Claire, you should do that with me sometimes, maybe.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, true. It's definitely saves a lot of energy rather than trying to change people, which is hard work, isn't it? So
it is.
Sounds good. Definitely. I'll have to give it a listen. Sounds like a good one. Great. Okay, let's dive straight in and get into the details. So obviously, here to talk about impactful thought leadership. For Claire and I, we've worked in PR and B2B marketing for 30-ish years, I think.
Yes.
Something like that. But thought leadership has been around the block many times, and I think the number of times we hear it and think, are you really going to be a thought leader? I'm not quite sure. So there's quite a lot of and nodding goes on, certainly in our world. I'm sure it does in yours too. But so I suppose as an opening question, what is it? What is real thought leadership to you?
I liken it to a lighthouse. So if you think of a lighthouse and that shining beam, that bright beam that shines, that guides ships home safely, that bright light, that beam is an organization's thought leadership. You're providing direction and clarity. It's valuable data-backed insights that give guidance. Thought leadership is not a sales pitch. It is not your opinion. Yes, you can have an opinion on thought leadership, but it has to be backed by data, and you have to be driving action. You actually have to be providing a solution. So it's real world research, real world data that's presented in an actionable, solutions orientated format. And I think a lot of people do roll their eyes when it comes to being a thought leader. People are like, oh God, here we go again. Because I think the word influencer and thought leadership and a thought leader are, people think they're interchangeable, and they're not. An influencer has opinions. And don't get me wrong, there are amazing B2B influencers that have incredible experience in thought leadership. And yes, we need to use those insights and we need to tap into their opinions. But if it's not backed by credible data, it's just that. It's just an opinion. So thought leadership for me is that guiding light. It's that lighthouse guiding organizations. And for thought leadership to be truly valuable, it has to really inspire action or change.
Yeah, that's interesting. And the difference between being an influencer and being a thought leader, the use of data to back it up. I guess, you need to be giving people something that they don't already know fundamentally. And, a view as to where things are going. But I'd never really thought about it from the kind of, seeing it through to a solution perspective so much. That's kind of a bit of a new one on me.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you connect the data side to it, it's exactly that, isn't it? The data is showing you what that action needs to be or what the challenges that needs to be overcome. But sometimes I think I really like separating the influencer from the thought leader. I hadn't even thought of it that way. In my head, it's much more, it's often about understanding what's happening in a sector, for example, really what challenges are. So it's a way of bringing you much, much closer to your customers or much, much closer to your audience, whoever that needs to be, I suppose. I often think that it should really start with the sales team. You often see thought leaders as the CEO and the leaders in the company. And whilst absolutely that's often the voice to it, the people that really understand what's happening in the customer world and the challenges that they're facing are the sales team. And I think they often get a little bit sidelined when it comes to thought leadership.
Well, 100%. And I think when we are talking about thought leadership, especially from an iResearch services standpoint, you have to tap into your thought leadership ecosystem. So for us, that is our sales team. It's our editorial team. It's our client sales team. It's anyone who has real deep insights into what your customer pain points are. What are keeping your customers up at night? Producing thought leadership that is not answering a critical question of what solution does my product solve? And I think that's the big thing. You've got to look at what solution does my product or service provide? What problem am I solving? And you've got to understand it from the lens of your audience, the lens of your consumers. And just by doing that, you are already reaching that sales pitch without being salesy. And we find the best form is, yes, thought leadership from end to end. You've got ideation, you've got research, you've got the data, you've got data analysis, you've got storytelling, you've got activation. So you've got all of these moving parts. But in theory, you have to have a really good idea. So that ideation is really, really important. It's got to be relevant to your target audience. It's got to be niche enough that you're giving them new insights into something. And the data's got to back up some kind of solution. It's all fair and well to say 63% of your audience feel X, Y, and Z. So what? What do you do with that? What is the next action? What are we invoking people to do with that information? So it's really providing new narratives, new insights that people don't have, that's not available. And that's why it's so important to base it in research, and research that is not, I'm not talking about 30 opinion leaders who have an opinion and it's, here's my data of 30 people and this is what they said. A really good sample size of 300 people or more that are giving you real insights into that solution, and that you bring that data to life in a really beautifully crafted story. And you're providing your audience with something that is new to them. You're presenting new concepts to them. So we do, Claire, we bring in our sales team, absolutely, because they're sitting with our clients. We at iResearch Services, we do monthly sit downs with our sales team and say, what are our clients' pain points, right? Because that's going to direct us as the B2B marketing team to say, right, how do I speak to my clients in a way that resonates with them? What language are they using? If I don't understand what's keeping my clients up at night, then I'm missing the boat.
Okay. Yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, obviously, we can't escape the fact that we're all in the business of creating thought leadership. So there is an element of fabrication in that. But would you agree that then the approach that you take to that? Yes, you need. If you're doing it for a commercial gain, and you've got a solution that you need to sell at the end of the day, because let's face it, that's why we're all here. You still need to avoid the obvious sales push. I think that's kind of what you just said. But how do you go about it to make sure that it is impartial, that it does actually, the data looks at actually what is happening in the market rather than trying to create, a line that fits very neatly into a sales proposition?
Well, that is survey design. I mean, and that is an art within itself. You have to design your survey in a way that's going to bring out the most valuable insights. Our audiences are they know what they're looking for. They know when they've been sold something. They can pick it up very, very easily. So we've got to be careful not to fall into that trap and understand that our audiences, they're intelligent, right? We're talking about C-suite decision makers here. We're talking about people who have been in the business for a very long time. So we're talking about if your product or solution solves a problem, solves a pain point, and you can speak to your audience and say, I understand what problems you're facing. I get it. I understand what's keeping you up at night. This is how our product or solution solves that problem. And you go about it in a way where you design the survey that asks questions in a neutral format, that's providing insights on that pain point and how they would solve that problem. Your solution or product will come up because if you're in the business of making money, so you've honed that solution, you've honed your products and services, right? So you know that it's answering the big problem and the big pain points, is providing that solution. But the way that you design that survey, the way that you ask those questions, the way that you go to your research group and you say to them, how would you do it? What problems and solutions what problems do you have, and how do you solve that? What products and services do you use? That will bring out that unbiased research. I cannot stress enough how important data is and how research design and survey design is critical to getting any thought leadership piece or campaign out to your audience in a meaningful, valuable way.
I mean, I completely understand. I mean, when we work with a lot of clients on research projects, particularly if we're doing thought leadership, when we look at the survey questions, we do, that's exactly the approach that we take. It's like actually retrofitting almost. It's like, what do we want the outcomes to be? What is it that will support the messaging that we're trying to create? And we will look at making sure that those surveys are designed, and having obviously companies like yourselves on board to help guide that process is invaluable.
We talked a lot about data already, but what else is important in the mix to make thought leadership valuable and credible, so it will resonate with the audience that it's targeted at?
I think where thought leadership campaigns start, or where it should start, is at the ideation phase. That is critical. What is that big idea that you're going to be centering your thought leadership piece or campaign around? And again, it's looking at white space and gray space analysis. It's really understanding what's out there in the market, what is going to help set you apart from the competitors. A real thought leadership that resonates, you're giving new perspectives, you're giving valuable new information to your audience backed by relevant, credible data. So it's that big idea. It's that ideation. You need to, and I think a lot of the times where people fall short is they go too broad. They look at really broad, generic topics, and they think that they're going to get original insights and ideas. But you really have to go into those broader topics. You have to understand what research papers, what thought leadership, what white papers are out there. And you really need to find that white space. What new that you can bring to your market that's going to educate your audience to solve their pain points, educate them on products and solutions that you have, how it works, why it works, back that by data. But for me, you really have to start at the ideation phase. That is the most critical. And I think people often, they kind of, not that they skip the phase because everyone has an idea, all thought leadership is based on an idea, but I don't think enough time is spent really researching that white space and gray space analysis, really understanding how that relates to your target audience. Does your target audience even care about the topic that you're talking about? You know, we've heard so much about artificial intelligence, I think is a perfect example. I think people are getting artificial intelligence fatigue. Like, yes, we get it. What is the next phase? Like, where's it taking me? I get that I can use ChatGPT. I get that there's security issues. I get that it helps with all of these content creation and, you know, brainstorming, and you know, I can speak to it on my phone, and there's all these amazing things that are happening with AI. We now need to go deeper into that topic. We now need to really get to the nuts and bolts of it. So if we're talking about AI and B2B marketing, how is it helping the B2B marketer? How is it helping with thought leadership? How do we ensure that we keep our credibility and our trust if we're using AI? And we need these experts to come to the party and say, like, right, this is a study I've done. This is the research I've done. These are how 4,000, 5,000 B2B marketers are using it. You know, provide content that is valuable. I would much rather download a white paper based on 4,000 to 5,000 B2B marketers who are using AI every day and getting results. And also, don't only focus on the successes. I think, you know, there's a lot to be learned from failure. So I would much rather read a paper and look at data about people who have used it, who have failed, and they found a solution for that. So I think that ideation phase, you know, you need to make sure that it really is original and that you're diving into the topic deep enough to be providing new relevant information to your audience.
I think you're absolutely right. Nobody spends enough time on the ideation at all. So they basically say, this is my product, this is the problem it solves, and that's what we'll look at. But you're right, the more niche you go, the more interesting the stats get. And yes, they might not be relevant for everybody, but actually they will have much more value because they are important. I think I read this on the iResearch website, actually. Lots of great blogs, research on there, just to give you a little push there. But I think I read, there was, I think in one of the webinars that you did, that you were talking about, there was a stat that said 38% of leaders said their primary thought leadership challenge was finding the right topics and themes. So it's clearly, you know, clearly is an issue. And that kind of brings me to the point about, should everybody be a thought leader or shouldn't they? You know, if someone, I feel like some of it, if it's not natural and organic, actually it might not be worth them pursuing. It should, maybe they should be concentrating on a different Marcoms strand or theme or campaign. What do you think?
Well, I definitely think that this comes to the age-old debate of content marketing versus thought leadership. So there's a lot of, you can put out a blog with insights and opinions. It's not thought leadership. You know what I mean? So no, not everyone can be a thought leader, and not everyone should be a thought leader. Everyone can aspire to be one. And we're talking about organizational thought leadership here, right? So we're talking about organizations who, it's a long-term investment. It's a long-term strategy. Thought leadership is not something that can be done overnight. And you don't become a thought leader by putting out one really good white paper backed by credible data. You know, it's something that you continually have to work on. And it's also about how you disseminate that information. So if we're looking at, should everyone be a thought leader? No, unless you have something that is going to be new and credible and relevant to your audience. There are different ways in B2B that you can disseminate your services and your promotional assets. thought leadership sits at the top of the funnel. It's not a promotional exercise. It positions you for brand equity. It builds brand relevance and trust and credibility. So it really does take quite a large investment. And I think this is, and I don't want to scare people away from doing it, because I think it is something that is really valuable, but you've got to have the money to be able to invest in it. And that's often going to your stakeholders and saying, look, and it's really difficult, because we know that measuring the ROI of thought leadership is an entirely different debate. And I'm sure we'll get to that later. That's an entirely different can of worms. But you have to go to your stakeholders and say, look, like, this is the investment that I need. It's quite considerable, but these are the returns that I can bring. But because it's long term, often stakeholders are hesitant to give, your thought leadership departments or your marketing departments or your business development departments. Again, there's a debate of where thought leadership sits within an organization. But to give whichever department the budget to actually go and conduct the research, to conduct the ideation, and then to put that together in a beautiful story, takes time and it takes investment. So no, not everyone should. I think you really have to look at what your organizational goals are. What is your organization trying to achieve? And does thought leadership sit within that? Is it going to give you the metrics that you're looking for? Sometimes creating beautiful content is good enough. Getting your influencers and your opinion leaders on a podcast and talking about topics that are interesting to your target audience is a good start. Webinars are a really interesting way of bringing people in your ecosystem together. I think one thing that B2B marketers really need to focus on is your ecosystem. What organizations are in that industry? What governing bodies are in that industry? What publications are in your industry that really have something valuable to say? Collaborate with them. Put out really valuable content for your audience. It doesn't necessarily have to be thought leadership, but if you are going to do thought leadership, you need to focus on the ideation, you need to focus on the research, and it does take investment.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. I think, that's where you get in the whole sort of argument around misuse of terms, which obviously we're great at in marketing generally. But, there's actually a need for a term which is more like thought contribution, because a lot of what we do as a PR agency is about thought contribution. It's piggybacking on thought leadership and trends and things that are going on, and adding your two penneth as a client. And I mean, obviously that's, it's a tactic in itself, like you said, overlaps with content marketing. But actually, rather than everyone thinking we need to be the thought leader in the market, actually be a really good thought contributor, especially if your budgets are limited, because there's somebody else out there who's spending the money, because they're bigger, and actually you can jump on you can utilize what they're doing as well to some degree.
So would you always recommend testing your thought leadership on as many stakeholders as you can possibly find? You mentioned about, once I've come up with my concept, I go to my sales team, I'll go to my exec team. So it's just about using that ecosystem, again, as you said, to test, to see if it works. And if not, you've got to go back and start again.
You do, absolutely, because it might be really interesting to you because you know what you're trying to sell. But remember, thought leadership is not a sales pitch. Okay, it sits at the top of the funnel. It's building brand equity. It's building credibility. It's building trust. So if a big idea doesn't land, you don't want to invest in it. Even if a topic for a blog article doesn't land, what is the point of spending time crafting a beautiful article, looking for secondary data and research? You put it on your website, you put it out on LinkedIn, and nobody reads it. It's what's the point of creating content for content's sake? That's not what we're here for. So the more people you can test it on, and that's why it's part of your ecosystem are those influencers, those really those the brightest minds in your industry. Get as many of those people in your ecosystem as possible and run it past them, because they will also have really intriguing opinions and insights on a topic, on an idea, and they can also help you craft that to fit your audience needs.
Yeah, a lot of work really goes into it to do it properly. I think that's the underlying
Yes.
message, isn't it?
Yep.
It can't be done, can't just be done on a lightly if
On a
it's done
whim.
properly. No.
Yep.
I'd like to kind of move the conversation on a bit to talk about what you do once you've got the insights. You've got the data, you've got the insights, you've worked out what the kind of the thought leadership themes are out of that. What are you seeing clients wanting to do, or having successes in terms of utilizing that, activating the thought leadership through different forms of content, different channels? What's working and what's not at the moment?
So when you've got your data, the creative, the beautiful part of thought leadership comes out. So it's analyzing that data. And that's, it's really important to analyze and bring out what are those key insights, what is really new, and what's really going to help your client stand out, right? Because the whole point about thought leadership, again, building credibility, building trust, providing action. So what insights are really going to help drive that solution forward, provide that solution? And then you have to craft a beautiful story. And this is an art in itself, being able to bring data out into a beautiful story. And that resonates emotionally with your audience. You don't, we're all human. As I mentioned, there's many thought leadership papers, many research papers out there. It really needs to connect with your audience on that human emotional level. So having case studies that back it up, data that backs it up, and also the way that you present it. Not everybody wants to read a 60-page white paper. Some people want to watch a 3-minute video with just the key insights. Some people want a really beautifully crafted, really cleverly put together infographic. Some people want to listen to a podcast about the insights and research and the solutions that they can take to it. There's webinars that you can do. We actually have Thought Leadership for Tomorrow, which is our flagship event. That, we find is a beautiful way of bringing all different organizations together with all their different research and insights. And we talk about trending topics. So we in person, in the room, talking about trending topics across the whole thought leadership space, brightest minds in the industry, top organizations with their research. And we just hash it out for a whole day. So people can ask all the questions they want to. And we just talk about thought leadership for an entire day. And we found that's a beautiful way of bringing the community together to talk about things that are impacting us on a daily basis. So you really have to be creative in a way. And that's, again, understanding your audience personas. And again, coming back to the measurement. So what matters to your organization? And we're all going to say lead generation, right? We're all going to say closing deals and bringing in money, because that's what we're in the business to do. We're in the business to make money. So you've got to understand your audience. You've got to understand where they want to pick up content. Where are they picking up content? If white papers don't work for you, don't worry about it. Do the podcasts, do the webinars, do the videos, do the webinars. That's where you're going to get the interest, where people can actually then challenge you on those insights, ask the questions, and you can beautifully deliver that data that you've come up with.
Cool. It's really interesting. I think I was looking on your website and came across one of those webinars, which I would recommend anyone listening to go and have a look at. Because there's one on entitled "Crafting Your Reputational Awe Factor," and I just thought some of it was, just such really good advice about what it's going to be the thing that your audience wants to hear, and bringing it back to and what sits well with you and makes kind of that emotional connection between the brand and the audience, which I think in B2B particularly, marketers really struggle with. It's really hard for them to find that emotional connection that's so important. It's consumer, you're always, people buy on emotion rather than from a B2B perspective. So but it's becoming more important, I think, for a lot of B2B brands.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you've got to remember that the decision makers within B2B, it's large investments that they have to put out, and it's their career on the line. It's if this fails and I've invested $1 million of my company's money in this, like that's my reputation on the line. I've failed. So, you've really got to understand they heavily invested decisions that people are making. So you really, it's going to take a lot longer to get them to make that decision. No one's going to invest large sums of money on a whim. It's not, it's not buying an iPhone. It's not, buying a perfume where if you don't like it, you can shelve it or give it to your niece or your mom. Do you know what I mean? It's a large investment. So people are lying awake at night wondering, like, is this the best decision for me? Like, what do I do? You've got to understand that, and you've got to help your audience through that journey. And the only way you can do that is if you really understand them. So you've got to carry them, basically. So the more content that you can put out there in more creative ways that they can get to know you, get to know your service, get to know how it's helped other people. Case studies and testimonials are so important. How have I helped somebody else? And this is the result that they got. You can trust us.
And particularly in the right format. I'm just, if you think about emotional connection and you get faced with a 30-page white paper and you're thinking, I don't have 3 minutes, let alone 30 minutes to read this, that emotional connection is a negative. It's like, you're just making it harder work for me. Whereas if I'm happy to, consume 5 social posts because that's all the time I've got, and it delivers the content and the expertise and the thought leadership that you need, you've built that emotional connection.
Just going back to the point about, I suppose, we're all in the business of lead generation. The age-old problem for marketing is that the business thinks we just flick the switch and leads pour in.
That'd be nice.
That short-term view that we all hate, because we realize you need to be doing a lot more than that to win the business that you really need to win. When it comes to ROI around thought leadership campaigns, how does that work? Are there sort of 2 levels? Can you measure the leads that are, or the MQLs that are directly being driven from that? But how do you also measure the sort of the longer term, wider impact that it's having on awareness, for example?
Yeah. So this is, again, ROI. It's age-old decision, and it's been on our agenda for Thought Leadership for Tomorrow for 2 years, and it's on our agenda again. And Cindy Anderson and Anthony Marshall from IBM's Institute for Business Value have actually written a book on the ROI of thought leadership. It's available from February 11th. And I think that's going to give you a lot more insights than what I can give you in this podcast. But lending from discussions that we've had and what we do internally at iResearch Services, it's really measuring what matters to your organization, right? So as we say, we all in the business of generating leads and making money. So yes, when you've got a thought leadership piece, it is long term. It sits at the top of the funnel, right? So it's creating awareness. Very rarely are you going to have someone that converts into an HQL straight from reading a thought leadership piece. And this is what's so challenging for B2B marketers and B2B thought leadership producers, because if I'm investing these large sums of money into something that's not going to give me direct leads, but it's how you disseminate that information and how you turn it into evergreen content, right? So you've got one white paper. It has all of these rich data and insights. You're connecting to your ecosystem, right? So I have a report, beautiful figures, beautiful statistics, lots of solutions. It's packed with action-orientated insights. I now then go to the influencers in the industry and I say, right, this is my white paper. Have a read. Maybe we can jump on a podcast, have a bit of a discussion about it, right? So you're bringing in that credibility, you're bringing in trust, you're bringing in an outside perspective. Again, it's not a sales pitch. Why should anyone trust that your insights is correct? Okay, I asked 4,000, 5,000 respondents. Great. But how many of those were AI respondents? Do you know what I mean? People like our B2B audience are questioning us the whole time. So you bring on your influencers, you bring on your opinion leaders, you discuss it with them, you get their insights onto it. You are measuring how many people are downloading your content. But more than that, when your sales team speak to clients, what are your clients' takes on your thought leadership that you're putting out there? How is it building that credibility? What is your share of voice? Are any publications picking up on it? Are any other organizations quoting you? How is it helping build your presence in the organization, in your industry? It's very difficult to say, if I invest $200,000 in a thought leadership campaign, I will make $500,000 back. It's not an exchange like that. And I think that's why I'm really keen to read this book by Cindy Anderson and Anthony Marshall, because they are the experts on this topic, and I think they've come up with a formula to help us do this. So really keen, and watch out for that on the 11th of February. But you have to measure what matters to your organization and see how it is helping you in the broader sense of building the trust and credibility of your brand. And that's going to take a lot more work from your marketing team, because you've really got to go out there and see, are people mentioning you on LinkedIn? Are any research studies quoting you? So it takes a lot of work to go and find this all out, right? Are any publications picking up what you're putting down? Your sales team speaking to your clients, is it helping build your brand equity? Is it helping build your reputation out there? The more thought leadership you put out there, the best, the more you are engaging with your ecosystem, the more people are talking about it. Automatically, your website traffic should go up, right? Your LinkedIn followers should go up. Your engagement on your website should go up. Time on page should go up. So these are the metrics that marketers use every day. You should see an increase, and you can track that obviously from the launch of your report. But I think it's the real value you're going to get is in that qualitative speaking to people and really seeing what people think of it, and if anyone is quoting you.
It's great. I mean, it's very similar to how we approach measurement in PR. So it's a combination of metrics that build the picture, and we often talk about outcomes versus impact, and it's the impact part that actually is the hardest part to measure, but it's the one that's most critical. So it's bringing in all the metrics that you can get from all the different parts of the world that we operate in marketing, and bringing those in together really to tell a narrative around the impact of thought leadership, and for us broader kind of PR as well. I will definitely look out for the book, and in fact we'll see if we can put a link on the podcast as well, because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fantastic.
Yeah,
Cool.
definitely.
Good stuff. Okay, great. We're kind of wrapping up now, because I think we've covered lots of good stuff. As we've just talked about, we want to keep our content right for the audience. So I wanted to drag on for too long. I think what we like to do at the end is just ask the guest, ask you if there was, the topic today has been thought leadership, true thought leadership, what it's there for, what, why do it, and what is it and what isn't it. If there's one singular piece of advice you would give to other B2B marketers out there who are thinking about this or doing it, what would that be?
Make sure you as an organization are ready to be able to invest the time and budget into that thought leadership piece. As we've discussed, it's not always necessary. Like, you can create beautiful content that resonates with your audience, and that's not necessarily thought leadership if you're not ready for it. But if you are ready for it, data is king, and then storytelling. So ensure that once you've got that beautiful data that you spent time and resources on getting, ensure that you're able to craft that into a beautiful story that is really going to hit and land with your audience, and connect with them emotionally. Remember, we're not selling, we're educating. So if you can tick all those boxes, so you're educating your audience on something that they really need to know, they want to know, it answers their pain points, you've got beautiful backed, credible data with it, and you told it in a beautiful story, you've hit the nail on the head.
Brilliant. I think you just did.
I think you just did. Yeah, totally. That's a lovely way to wrap.
That's really, really good. And we both thank you very much for joining us today, Madelaine, and thanks very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. So there was some really great stuff in there. When I was doing the prep for the podcast, I was looking at kind of thought leaders and, what makes them, and et cetera, et cetera. And there's this stat out there that says if you run a quick search on LinkedIn for the word thought leadership, it comes up. There is 1.5 million people that have got thought leadership in their job titles, careers, whatever it is. And it's like, it's impossible. It's impossible to have that many thought leaders out there. Can you imagine the amount of content and data there would be if that was true? And I thought what Madelaine said about separate your influencers from your thought leaders is absolutely key. Never thought about it that way. It's absolutely right. Of that 1.5 million, it's probably 100,000 true thought leaders on the LinkedIn. And the second one was something that you said, which was thought contribution. I thought that was great because actually, when I was thinking about, does everybody need to be a thought leader? We get asked this all the time. It's often the first thing that people say to us when they come with a brief. We want to be a thought leader. Actually, you don't need to be a thought leader all the time. You don't. If you're a new brand, for example, and you're not bringing any particular expertise to the market, but you've got an idea for a product, you're not necessarily a thought leader and not going to be until you really know your audience, but you can be a thought contributor. And I like that. I'm going to use that in my next proposal.
Trademark it.
When appropriate.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's our new service. But no,
yes, I absolutely.
Yeah, I think my thoughts were similar. I mean, I thought what I really liked, and obviously, Madelaine's coming from, they're selling thought leadership as a business. So they obviously would be coming from it from this perspective, but actually just being candid about the fact that it is there to sell. Essentially, it's a term that's been created by marketers, and it sometimes gets positioned as this kind of ethereal, higher plane thing about, big thinkers or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it has to apply to something, a problem that can be solved by buying something or implementing or doing something in many ways. And I suppose I actually like the candidness of that, really. Yeah, the other thing actually, which again was something that kind of triggered in my head along the way, was actually the AI bit, and thinking about where user generated content is going. Brands are outputting thought leadership en masse, some of it great, some of it not true thought leadership, but essentially we're creating this vat of data and thought leadership that actually is much more valuable when you join the dots together. And you use a bit from somebody over here and a bit from somebody over here, and actually it's probably getting away from the commercial side of it for a particular brand. But actually I think we will almost create our own little room of what we want and how we want to consume it, and AI will basically just deliver that to us in the way we want it.
But I think that's one of the key trends for this year, which is about personalization in terms of your data, the way that you consume content and the content that you want. And Madelaine touched on it when she was talking about, you've got to create lots of different types of content because your audience consumes in different ways. And I think that's exactly it. I think AI will individualize or personalize the content that we receive in the way that we want to receive it. And it's going to become so clever at it. It'll do it without us thinking. And the challenge is always going to be, how do we then create whatever content that allows AI to work out what's appropriate to what one person that isn't appropriate to somebody else. But I think individual marketing, B2B's toyed with it for a while through ABM, but I think it kind of takes it down to its, the next step, which is all of us want to consume it in the way that we want to consume it. Why should it be difficult?
For listening to Shaking the B2B Tree, the podcast bringing you real life insights and strategies from B2B marketing professionals who think and act differently. Our mission is to help our listeners with many of the common challenges we all face in B2B marketing. I hope you found today's discussion thought-provoking and of practical help, and we'd love to hear your feedback on future topics you'd like us to explore. For more conversations with guests who are shaking the B2B tree, why not subscribe to the series or look out for our next episode on all major podcast channels as well as LinkedIn. Bye!